All right, here we go. Today we have Mike Benz, who is a White House speechwriter and tech policy advisor. He later worked at the State Department running the cyber portfolio in the Economic Bureau. Today, Mike Benz is executive director of the Foundation for Freedom Online, who's a free speech watchdog dedicated to restoring the promise of a free and open internet. Mike Benz, welcome to Vlad TV.
Thanks for having me, Vlad.
Absolutely. We actually met on X because you had reposted my Tekashi interview.
I thought it was a work of art.
Thank you. Thank you. You actually said, hold on, what was the tweet? You said, watching the Tekashi 69 interview and noting there's more journalistic integrity in basic hip-hop YouTube journalism than in any mainstream media correspondent in the White House press.
It's true. You just don't see that kind of holding yourself to account, holding your feet to the fire. I mean, it's there's a realness that I think you get maybe just in music reporting that you don't have in politics reporting. And I just find that so funny because there's so much interplay between music and politics. And in the work that I do, I see so much instrumentalization of music, the music industry, musical artists for political purposes. And yet political beat reporters kind of profess to be the creme de la creme of, independent journalism, and it's anything but.
Well, let's talk about your story, because you just did a couple of Joe Rogan interviews that were very provocative. So originally you started as a corporate lawyer.
Yeah.
Okay, and you were actually representing tech companies.
Tech companies, financial firms, private equity, mergers and acquisitions, corporate governance, a pretty wide range for about 8 years. And then I got bit by the internet bug. There was always, I guess, a side of me that was, I sort of grew up in an internet family and always kind of had this more artistic side that, let's just say being a corporate lawyer doesn't scratch the itch. And then when I saw what was happening to the internet in 2016 with the onset of social media censorship, I just dedicated my whole life to trying to understand the forces behind it. And that took me into a career in the White House and in diplomacy and into the wider cinematic universe of global power structures, I guess.
Okay, so you started writing online about internet censorship, and that ultimately got you into the White House.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of private briefings. At the time, people didn't really understand what was going on. Everybody was looking at Mark Zuckerberg or Susan Wojcicki at YouTube and saying, they're the ones censoring me. And I would give these private briefings because I just compiled so much research on the topic. And the first slide was what everyone thinks censorship is. And it's, a little person looking up at a boot, and it's got Mark Zuckerberg's face looking down, putting the boot on your neck. And then the second slide in this presentation, this was like a 6-hour, 190 slide presentation is a stock thing. The second slide was what censorship actually looks like. And it's Mark Zuckerberg is the little person looking up at a boot, and it is the blob. It is the foreign policy establishment and national security state putting their boot on Mark Zuckerberg's neck to put its boot on yours. And I think that framework was not understood at all from 2016 to 2020. It took Trump getting kicked off social media. It took a lot of things that started to change between 2020 and 2022 for that message to really begin to take off. And now I think almost everyone who pays attention to the issue understands this is actually how things operate.
Okay, so let's talk about how you got into the White House, because originally you worked for Ben Carson.
Yeah.
So how did that happen?
Well, I'd done some real estate work as well. And at the time, Secretary Carson was working on kind of tech innovation in low-cost housing and economic development and regional development. And so I started working with Secretary Carson, who's an amazing guy. And at the same time, I continued networking and briefing folks around the White House. And so it was a kind of natural evolution to go in and take over that portfolio for White House speechwriting. It's kind of funny, though, because when I got to the White House, I don't think the White House really appreciated the size of the threat. At the time, I think Trump was running on re-election mostly on economic grounds, and he was calling MAGA Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Amazon. So I was writing speeches about social media censorship, and the response right up until close to the 2020 election, when it started to really affect the White House personally, was to kind of disregard that, because I don't think they wanted the dogfight with the big tech companies unless they absolutely had to, and then it was too late.
Okay, so like you said, you're working for Ben Carson, who at the time was the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah.
And that somehow got you to become a speechwriter for Donald Trump himself.
Yeah.
So were you actually talking personally with Trump during this time?
No, but there's a lot of intermingling between the agencies. There's a lot of, it's a cabinet level position for Secretary Carson. And what I was doing was I was networking while I was at HUD, the same way I was networking while I was in New York City, giving these private briefings, doing these presentations, putting out my research to policymakers. And that began to make an impact behind the scenes. So they brought me into the White House.
Okay. And what type of things were you writing into Trump's speeches exactly?
Well, this was what was really funny. There was one in the summer of 2020 where we brought together these state attorney generals, I think like 26 or 27 states, around taking on big tech abuses. And it was kind of consumer protection, Federal Trade Commission, FTC type stuff, and then also social media censorship weaponization by these companies. And I remember I wrote that speech, and Trump looks down at it because when he's seated, he does teleprompter when he's standing, but when he's seated, he has a printout. And this was like my magnum opus. I thought that basically like years of work were channeled into this. I had all the players, I had all the history, I had the network, I had all the statistics. And Trump looks down at this. This is about June 2020. He goes, everyone always talks about censorship like it's a big deal. Let them censor all they want. They can't stop me. They tried to stop me before. And, at the time I had a little bit of hair at that point left. And I think that was when I lost the last of it. It was a dogfight even to get censorship on the menu for that speech, because the state attorney generals were skittish about losing their consensus with the Democrats for their 50-state coalition taking on big tech on antitrust grounds. So they said, can we leave the censorship out of the censorship talk? And I said, no way. And then, Trump, that's part of the magic of Trump, is that it's almost like a fortune cookie. You never know, as a speechwriter for Trump, what you're going to get. And honestly, that's what makes his authenticity so visceral. It's very real. Even as a speech, he doesn't follow the script. It's almost like when you nail it as a speechwriter for him, it's kind of an honor for him to read what's on the page, because he would only do that if it's perfectly 100% consistent with his vision and way of seeing the world. But in that case, I thought it was a strategic mistake that the White House didn't realize until way too late about the forces they were up against.